My wife told me I needed to think about my mistakes while she went on a girls' trip. Turns out, she was absolutely right. I just didn't think about the mistakes she expected me to. Let me paint you the picture of what my life had become. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 6, make coffee, and brace myself for whatever crisis would somehow become my fault before I even finished my first cup. Tuesday mornings were particularly brutal because that's when she'd review all the ways I'd disappointed her over the weekend. "You didn't take out the trash Monday night," she'd say, arms crossed like a prosecutor presenting evidence. I had to drag those heavy bags to the curb myself. Never mind that I worked a 10-hour shift Monday and came home to find her binge-watching Netflix. Never mind that I'd taken the trash out every other week for 3 years straight. One forgotten Monday, and suddenly I was the villain in her personal drama. But here's the thing about living with someone who's never wrong. You start picking your battles. Not because you're weak, but because you realize your time on this planet is limited, and spending it arguing with someone who twists every conversation into your personal failings gets exhausting real quick. "You're right," I'd say, grabbing my work bag. "I'll remember next time." And she'd smile like she'd won some grand victory, completely missing the fact that I wasn't conceding. I was just choosing peace over pointless conflict. This pattern had been our reality for 2 years. Every disagreement somehow circled back to my shortcomings. When the dishwasher broke, it was because I loaded it wrong. When her car got a flat tire, it was because I didn't remind her to check the pressure. When her sister called her dramatic, well, that was obviously my influence rubbing off on her. The worst part? I actually started believing some of it. When you hear the same criticisms day after day, they start echoing in your head even when she's not around. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I really wasn't trying hard enough. But last week, something shifted. Not in some dramatic movie moment. Just a quiet realization that hit me while I was sitting in traffic after another brutal day at work. I was dreading going home. Think about that for a second. I was dreading walking into my own house because I knew whatever mood she was in would somehow become my responsibility to fix. And if I couldn't fix it, well, that would just be another item on her endless list of my inadequacies. That's when she dropped the bombshell about the girls' trip. "I need a break," she announced Thursday night, not looking up from her phone. "Rachel and the girls are going to Cancun next weekend. I'm booking my ticket." "Okay," I said, genuinely meaning it. Maybe some time apart would do us both good. But she wasn't done. "I've been so stressed lately, and I think I know why." "Here we go," I thought, but I kept my face neutral. "What's that?" "It's this constant tension in the house. Your energy has been so negative lately. You come home from work all grumpy and distant, and it's affecting my mental health." I almost laughed. My energy was negative? I was the one walking on eggshells every day, measuring my words, trying not to set off whatever landmine was waiting for me. "I think while I'm gone, you should really think about what you're bringing to this relationship," she continued, finally looking at me with that expression she'd perfected, part disappointment, part pity. "Maybe some time alone will help you figure out where you've been going wrong." And there it was. Even her vacation was somehow about my failures. "That sounds like a good idea," I told her, and I meant every word, just not in the way she thought. She spent the next 3 days planning her escape, calling it self-care and healing time. Meanwhile, I watched her pack designer clothes for a trip that would cost more than most people's monthly rent, all while lecturing me about being more mindful of our budget. The irony wasn't lost on me, but pointing it out would just trigger another lecture about how I don't support her need for mental health breaks. Sunday morning arrived, and she stood by the door with her oversized suitcase, looking like she was heading off to save the world instead of getting drunk on a beach. "Remember what I said," she told me, adjusting her sunglasses. "Really think about your mistakes while I'm gone. I'll be ready to talk when I get back, but I need to see some real accountability from you." I walked her to her rideshare, kissed her cheek, and said exactly what she wanted to hear. "Safe travels, dear. I'll definitely be thinking about my mistakes." She smiled, satisfied that she'd left me with homework to make me a better husband. As I watched her car disappear down the street, I realized she was absolutely right about one thing. I didn't need to think about my mistakes, starting with the biggest one I'd ever made. The silence hit me before I even made it back to the front door. Not the uncomfortable silence I'd grown used to, the kind that meant I'd said something wrong or failed to read her mood correctly. This was different. This was the absence of constant criticism, the missing soundtrack of sighs and eye rolls that had become the background music of my life. I stood in the doorway for a moment, keys still in my hand, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. For the next 5 days, nobody would tell me I was loading the dishwasher wrong. Nobody would analyze my tone when I said good morning. Nobody would turn my bad day at work into evidence of my poor attitude. My phone buzzed. A text from her, sent from the airport. Flight delayed an hour. Already stressed. This is exactly the kind of thing that wouldn't happen if I wasn't so anxious from everything at home. Even her travel delays were my fault. I stared at the message for a full minute, waiting for that familiar guilt to kick in, the automatic response where I'd scramble to somehow make this better, maybe suggest she grab a coffee or find a good book in the airport shop. Instead, I felt nothing. Actually, that's not true. I felt something, but it took me a second to recognize it because it had been so long since I'd experienced it. Clarity. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a sandwich. Not the kind she approved of, white bread instead of the expensive multigrain, regular mayo instead of the organic stuff she insisted was better for us. I ate it standing at the counter, dropped a few crumbs, and didn't immediately clean them up. It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt revolutionary. Another text, boarding now. Remember what we talked about. This week needs to be productive for both of us. Productive. Like my marriage was a quarterly review at work. I typed back, have a great time. Enjoy the sun. What I didn't type. Thanks for giving me the space to realize what I actually need to be productive about. She'd been gone less than 3 hours, and I was already seeing things differently. Without her constant commentary on my behavior, I could actually think. And what I was thinking wasn't pretty. When had I become this person? When had I started apologizing for things that weren't my fault? When had I decided that keeping peace was more important than keeping my self-respect? I thought about last month's dinner party disaster. Her college friend had made some passive-aggressive comment about our house being cozy, code for small. Instead of defending our home, I'd spent the evening agreeing with every criticism, practically apologizing for our mortgage being what we could afford. Later that night, she'd been furious, not at her friend's rudeness, but at me for not being more successful, for not providing the kind of lifestyle that would impress her friends. Sometimes I wonder if you're even trying, she'd said, lying in bed with her back to me. Everyone else is moving forward with their lives. I'd laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what more I could possibly do. I worked 50-hour weeks, handled most of the household repairs myself, never complained when she spent money on things we didn't need. But somehow, I was the one not trying hard enough. Now, sitting in my quiet kitchen, I realized how insane that conversation had been. She'd criticized me for not making enough money to impress her friend who'd inherited her house from her parents. The logic didn't add up, but in the moment, I'd accepted it because arguing would just mean more conflict. My phone buzzed again. A photo this time, her and her friends at the airport bar, all smiles and cocktails. First drink of freedom, the caption read. Freedom. From what exactly? From the man who worked his ass off to pay for half of this trip? From the guy who'd never once told her she couldn't go anywhere or do anything she wanted? But I knew what she meant. Freedom from having to deal with reality. Freedom from having to acknowledge that relationships require work from both people. Freedom from taking any responsibility for the problems she was so eager to blame on me. I found myself laughing, actually laughing at the absurdity of it all. Here I was, the supposed source of all her stress, and she was celebrating being away from me like she'd escaped prison. Meanwhile, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe normally. The house felt bigger somehow. Not just quieter, but actually bigger, like her presence had been taking up physical space beyond what one person should occupy. I walked through each room, really looking at things for the first time in forever. Everything was exactly how she wanted it. The throw pillows that couldn't be sat on because they'd lose their shape. The coffee table books that were never opened because they might get fingerprints on them. The candles that were too expensive to actually burn. When had my own home become a museum where I was just a visitor trying not to break anything? Another buzz. This time a group photo from the plane. Taking off. Time to reset and recharge. Some people need to figure out how to do the same from home. Some people. Not even my name. Just some people who apparently needed to figure their lives out while she recharged on a beach. I set the phone down and walked to the bathroom mirror. The guy looking back at me seemed tired. Not just work tired, but soul tired. When had I started carrying my shoulders like that, hunched forward like I was bracing for the next criticism? When had I become someone who tiptoed through his own life? Standing there, I made a decision that had been building for months without me even realizing it. She wanted me to think about my mistakes? Fine, but I wouldn't be thinking about the ones she'd spent 2 years drilling into my head. I'd be thinking about the real ones, the ones that actually mattered. Starting with mistake number 1, believing that love meant accepting disrespect. And mistake number 2, thinking that a woman who needed a vacation from me was someone worth fighting for. The next 4 days were going to be very productive indeed, just not in the way she expected. Day 1, without her constant commentary, was like taking off shoes that had been too tight for years. I woke up Monday morning at 7 instead of 6. No rush to get the coffee started before she could complain about the noise. No need to check her mood before deciding whether it was safe to turn on the morning news. I sat on the couch, the same couch where I usually perched on the edge, ready to jump up if she needed anything. This time, I sprawled out completely, feet up, remote in hand. ESPN. For 30 straight minutes. No interruptions about how sports were mindless or comments about grown men caring too much about games. By noon, I'd done something I hadn't done in 2 years. I'd gone an entire morning without apologizing for anything. The realization hit me like a cold slap. When was the last time I'd gone 6 hours without saying sorry for something? For breathing too loud, for leaving a water glass on the counter, for not immediately agreeing with whatever opinion she'd picked up from her latest podcast. My phone stayed mercifully quiet until around 2. Beach day? This is exactly what I needed. Finally feeling like myself again. I stared at that message for a long time. Finally feeling like herself again. After 1 day away from me. What did that make me in her life? The thing preventing her from being herself? But here's what really got to me. I was feeling like myself again too. And I'd forgotten what that felt like. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was actually sick, but because I needed time to think without distractions. For once, I was going to put my own needs first. I drove to the diner downtown, the one she hated because it wasn't trendy enough, ordered a full breakfast, extra bacon, and sat in a booth by the window with a newspaper. The waitress didn't critique my order. The guy at the next table didn't analyze my posture. Nobody questioned whether I deserved to take up space. Sitting there, I started making a mental list. Not of my supposed failures, but of actual facts about my marriage. Fact 1. I hadn't chosen anything in our house in 3 years. Not the furniture, not the paint colors, not even which brand of laundry detergent we used. Every decision was hers, and my job was to pay for it and pretend I'd been consulted. Fact 2. I couldn't remember the last time she'd asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. But I could recite every detail of her drama with her coworkers, her family, her yoga instructor who apparently gave everyone else better adjustments. Fact 3. Every vacation, every dinner out, every weekend plan revolved around what she wanted to do. When had I stopped having preferences? When had I become just the guy who made her choices possible? The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a rough patch we were going through. This was the marriage she wanted, her as the star of the show, me as the supporting cast member who better not forget his lines. Wednesday brought another beach photo, this time with some guy I didn't recognize, arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing, making new friends. It's so nice to be around positive energy for once. Positive energy, right. But you know what? I wasn't even jealous. If some random tourist wanted to deal with her need for constant validation and attention, he was welcome to it. I was too busy remembering what it felt like to go 48 hours without someone telling me I was doing everything wrong. That evening, I did something that would have triggered a 3-hour argument if she'd been home. I ordered pizza and ate it straight from the box while watching an action movie with the volume actually turned up. No commentary about how the plot was stupid. No passive-aggressive sighs about the mess. No lecture about how we should be having meaningful conversations instead of staring at screens. Just me, enjoying something I liked in my own house. It was revolutionary. By Thursday, the truth was impossible to ignore. Every day, without her criticism, I felt more like the person I used to be. More confident, more relaxed, more willing to take up space in my own life. She'd been gone 4 days, and I hadn't missed her once. Not her personality, not her company, not even her physical presence. What I'd missed was the idea of her. The woman I thought I'd married before she decided that marriage meant having a live-in audience for her complaints about everything. Thursday night, I sat down with a beer, a regular beer, not the craft stuff she insisted was more sophisticated, and really thought about her assignment. She wanted me to think about my mistakes. Fine. Mistake number 1. Marrying someone who saw love as a constant performance review. Mistake number 2. Accepting that my feelings didn't matter as much as her comfort. Mistake number 3. Believing that being a good husband meant disappearing into whatever she needed me to be. But the biggest mistake? Staying silent for 2 years while she slowly convinced me that I was the problem in a relationship where only one person's happiness mattered. As I finished that beer, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. I didn't want to fix this marriage. I wanted out of it. Not because I was angry. Anger would fade. Not because I wanted revenge. That would just make me like her. I wanted out because I deserved better than spending my life apologizing for existing. She'd asked me to think about solutions while she was gone, and I had found one. It just wasn't the solution she was expecting. Friday morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. Morrison Law Firm, how can I help you? I need to speak with someone about filing for divorce. Friday afternoon, I sat across from a divorce attorney named Thompson, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd probably seen every excuse and sob story in the book. How long have you been married? She asked, pen poised over a legal pad. 3 years next month. Children? No. Shared assets. I listed them off like inventory. The house we'd bought together, 2 cars, checking and savings accounts, her student loans that somehow became our debt after the wedding. Any documented history of abuse, infidelity, or abandonment? No, I said, then paused. Unless you count emotional manipulation, but I doubt that shows up on legal paperwork. She looked up from her notes. It doesn't, but it shows up in how you handle the divorce proceedings. You sound like you've thought this through. I have. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been thinking it through for longer than I'd admitted to myself. Every night, I'd lain awake wondering if this was just how marriage was supposed to feel. Every morning, I'd convinced myself that relationships required sacrifice, that her happiness was worth my silence. Any chance of reconciliation? I thought about the beach photos, the celebration of being away from me, the 2 years of being told I was the source of every problem. None whatsoever. She handed me a packet of papers. Read through these tonight. If you're serious about filing, bring them back Monday with the retainer. No-fault divorce in this state, so unless she contests it, we can have you free in 90 days. 90 days. 3 months to undo 3 years of gradually losing myself. That evening, my phone buzzed with her daily update. Girls' night out. Dancing until dawn. Finally remember what fun feels like when you're not walking on eggshells around someone's negativity. Walking on eggshells. Around my negativity. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I'd spent 2 years walking on eggshells around her moods, her criticisms, her constant need to be right about everything. But somehow, in her version of reality, I was the difficult one. I typed back, "Glad you're having fun. Enjoy your last night." She probably thought I meant her last night in Cancun. I meant something else entirely. Saturday morning, I did something I hadn't done since our honeymoon. I made a list of things I actually wanted. A quiet house where I could watch whatever I wanted on TV. Beer in the fridge that didn't come with a lecture about supporting local breweries. Friends who didn't get analyzed and criticized after every hangout. The ability to come home from work without immediately scanning the room for signs of what I'd done wrong. It wasn't a long list, but every item on it was impossible with her in my life. By noon, I'd started the practical preparations. I opened a new checking account at a different bank, one she'd never had access to. Transferred half our savings, my half, earned from work she'd never acknowledged or appreciated. I called a buddy from college who'd gone through his own divorce 2 years earlier. "You sure about this?" he asked after I'd explained the situation. "Never been more sure of anything." "What changed your mind?" "She went on vacation to get away from me, and I realized I needed a permanent vacation from her." He laughed, but not in a mean way. "Man, I remember that feeling. Like you'd been holding your breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. That was exactly what it felt like." Sunday afternoon brought the predictable pre-return anxiety text. "Flying home tomorrow morning. Hope you've had time to really think about things. We need to have a serious conversation when I get back. I've done a lot of reflecting on this trip, and I have some thoughts about what needs to change." What needs to change? Not what we need to work on together. What needs to change, meaning what I needed to fix about myself to make her life easier. I spent Sunday evening organizing paperwork. Bank statements, mortgage documents, insurance policies. Everything she'd need to understand that this wasn't a negotiation or a trial separation. This was the end. I also did something that felt both petty and necessary. I changed the Netflix password, not to spite her, but because I was tired of my viewing history being interrupted by her reality shows and true crime documentaries that she'd then spend hours analyzing out loud. Monday morning, I was back at the lawyer's office with signed papers and a cashier's check for the retainer. "You seem calmer than most people starting divorce proceedings," Thompson observed. "That's because I'm not starting anything. I'm finishing something that should have ended a long time ago." She handed me copies of everything. "She'll be served the papers within 48 hours of filing." Are you prepared for her reaction? I thought about 2 years of reactions to minor disagreements, to forgotten chores, to my existence taking up space in her perfectly curated life. I've been preparing for her reaction for 3 years. The difference is, this time I don't care if she's happy with my decision. Thompson smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. That's usually when you know you're making the right choice. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because the hard part was over. I knew that was coming when she got home. But because I'd finally stopped pretending that fixing this marriage was my responsibility. Some things can't be fixed because they were never broken in the first place. They were just built wrong from the beginning. That afternoon, I got the text I'd been expecting. "Landed. Can't wait to see you. I have so much to tell you about my realizations this week. I think this trip was exactly what we both needed." What we both needed. Right up until the end, everything had to include her. I typed back, "I'll be here. We definitely need to talk." She had no idea how right she was. Tomorrow would bring the conversation she'd been planning for 5 days. It just wouldn't be the conversation she was expecting. She walked through the front door Tuesday evening like she was returning from a humanitarian mission instead of a beach vacation. "I'm back," she announced, dropping her designer luggage in the middle of the hallway. Not next to the door, not in the bedroom, right where I'd have to step around it. Even her homecoming was designed to inconvenience me. "Welcome home," I said from the kitchen table, where I'd been waiting with a folder of papers. She didn't notice the folder. She was too busy scanning the house for evidence of whatever disasters I'd supposedly created in her absence. "It looks exactly the same," she said, sounding almost disappointed, like she'd been hoping to find something to criticize. "Did you expect it to look different?" "I don't know. I thought maybe you'd use the time to, I don't know, reorganize something. Show some initiative." There it was. 5 minutes back and already finding fault. She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and frowned. "You bought regular beer instead of the craft ones we usually get." I bought what I wanted to drink. Something in my tone made her look at me directly for the first time since she'd walked in. "Okay," she said slowly. "We'll talk about that later. First, I want to tell you about my trip. It was exactly what I needed. I feel so much clearer about everything now." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos. Beach shots, restaurant meals, group photos with her friends, that guy from the bar with his arm around her. "This is Derek," she said, showing me the photo. "He's a marketing executive from Chicago. Such an interesting guy. We had the most amazing conversations about life and relationships." "I'm sure you did." She missed the edge in my voice entirely. "He really helped me put things in perspective. You know how sometimes you need an outside view to see your situation clearly?" "Absolutely." "Right? So anyway, I've been thinking a lot about us, about what's been wrong, and I think I know how to fix things." She set her phone down and looked at me with that expression I knew well, the one she wore when she was about to deliver what she considered profound wisdom. "The problem is that we've gotten stuck in negative patterns. You come home stressed from work, and that stress affects the whole house. I absorb that energy, and then I react to it. And then you react to my reaction." I nodded. "Go on." "So Derek helped me realize that if we're going to make this work, you need to find better ways to manage your stress. Maybe therapy or meditation, or just leaving work at work instead of bringing it into our space." Our space. Not my home that I paid half the mortgage on. Our space that I was apparently contaminating with my presence. What else did Derek suggest? Well, he's not the only one I talked to. "Rachel thinks you might have some control issues. Like, the way you sometimes get quiet when I'm making plans or expressing my needs. She thinks that's a form of emotional withholding." Emotional withholding, right? And honestly, looking back over the week, I realized how much lighter I felt without that constant undercurrent of tension. It made me realize that I've been walking on eggshells around your moods for months. I sat back in my chair. You've been walking on eggshells around my moods. Yes, finally, you're getting it. I need you to understand that your emotional state affects me deeply. When you're negative or distant, it makes me anxious. And when I'm anxious, I can't be my best self in this relationship. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. But here's the good news. I think if you can work on managing your stress and being more present and positive, we can get back to being happy. And what do you need to work on? The question seemed to genuinely confuse her. What do you mean? I mean, what did you realize about yourself during all this reflection? What are you going to change? She blinked a few times. Well, I think I need to be more patient with your growth process. Change is hard, and I can't expect you to become a completely different person overnight. How generous of you. I'm being serious. I want this to work. I love you, but I love myself too, and I refuse to go back to feeling anxious and unhappy in my own home. I pulled my hand away from hers and placed it on the folder. You're absolutely right, I said. You shouldn't have to feel anxious and unhappy in your own home. And I shouldn't have to feel like I'm constantly failing some test I didn't know I was taking. Good. So we're on the same page. Completely. I opened the folder and slid the papers across the table, which is why I found a solution while you were gone. She looked down at the documents, and I watched her face change as she read the header. Petition for dissolution of marriage. What is this? Her voice went up an octave. It's the solution you asked me to find. You were right. I didn't need to think about my mistakes. My biggest mistake was thinking this marriage was worth saving. She stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? You can't be serious. You're filing for divorce because I went on a trip with my friends. I'm filing for divorce because you went on a trip to escape me, then came home to tell me everything I need to change to make you happy, without considering for 1 second what might make me happy. But we can work on this. We can go to counseling. So you can have a referee while you explain to a therapist how all our problems are my fault? No thanks. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. This is insane. You're throwing away 3 years of marriage because of one conversation. I'm ending 3 years of me apologizing for existing while you criticized everything I did, said, or thought. That's not what this was. Really? Name one thing you've apologized for in the past year. One thing you've admitted you were wrong about. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. That's not fair. You're putting me on the spot. I'm asking you a simple question. When was the last time you took responsibility for any problem in this marriage? I take responsibility. I just told you I need to be more patient with your growth. I almost laughed. You taking responsibility is you being patient while I become who you want me to be. Marriage is about compromise. No, marriage is about partnership. What we had was me compromising while you complained. She grabbed the papers and shook them at me. You can't just decide this unilaterally. Watch me. For the first time in 3 years, she was completely speechless. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. You can stay here tonight if you need to pack some things. But tomorrow, I suggest you find somewhere else to recharge from the stress of being married to me. You're serious about this. As serious as a heart attack. She sank back into her chair, staring at the divorce papers like they might disappear if she looked at them long enough. This isn't how this was supposed to go, she whispered. No, I said, pausing at the bottom of the stairs. It's exactly how it was supposed to go. You just never considered the possibility that I might actually solve the problem instead of becoming a better problem to live with. As I walked upstairs, I heard her calling Derek. The conversation she'd been planning for 5 days was over, and so were we. She spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find someone who would agree that I was having some kind of breakdown. I could hear her through the bedroom door, pacing the living room, phone pressed to her ear. He just snapped, she kept saying. Out of nowhere. I think he planned this whole thing while I was gone. She wasn't wrong about that part. By morning, she'd moved into full damage control mode. I came downstairs to find her sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and a notepad, like she was preparing for a business presentation. I've been thinking all night, she announced, and I understand why you're upset. You felt abandoned when I went on my trip, and you're lashing out. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. I'm not upset, and I'm not lashing out. I'm done. But that's exactly what I mean. You're being dramatic instead of talking through your feelings. My feelings are that I want a divorce. She slid the notepad toward me. She'd written a list titled Compromise Solutions. Look, I've come up with some alternatives. We could try couples therapy. We could plan regular date nights. We could set up better communication guidelines. I glanced at the list. Every item was about managing the symptoms of our broken relationship, not addressing the actual disease. What's number 7? I asked. She looked down. We could take turns picking weekend activities so you feel more included in decisions. Take turns. Like children sharing toys. It's about fairness. Fairness would have been you asking what I wanted to do sometime in the past 2 years instead of making a list now that you're facing consequences. She grabbed the notepad back. Fine. What do you want? Tell me what would make you change your mind. Nothing. Nothing? Come on. Everyone has a price. Everyone wants something. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who still didn't understand that this wasn't a negotiation. In her mind, this was just another problem she could solve by adjusting my behavior. I want to come home from work without wondering what I did wrong. I want to watch TV without commentary about my choices. I want to buy groceries without a lecture about my selections. I want to exist in my own house without feeling like I'm failing some test. Okay, I can work on that. I want a partner who asks about my day because she cares, not because she's looking for ammunition. I want someone who admits when she's wrong instead of explaining why she's actually right. I want a matter in my own marriage. Her face was getting red. I do ask about your day. When? When was the last time you asked about my day and listened to the answer without turning it into something about you? She opened her mouth, then closed it. That's what I thought. This is impossible, she exploded. You're asking me to be a completely different person. No, I'm not asking you to be anything. I'm telling you I'm done trying to be whatever person you need me to be. She stood up and started pacing again. You can't just give up on us. Marriage is work. You don't just quit when things get hard. I worked for 3 years. You complained for 3 years. That's not the same thing. I wasn't complaining. I was communicating my needs. Your needs were for me to be someone else. She spun around to face me. And your needs were for me to just accept everything and never speak up about problems. My needs were to feel like my wife actually liked me. That stopped her cold. Of course I like you. Really? Name one thing you like about me that isn't what I do for you. Another long pause. You're reliable. I'm reliable. Like a washing machine. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I meant you're... She struggled for words. You're stable. You're there when I need you. When you need me to do something for you. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You like that I pay half the bills, fix things when they break, and don't complain when you spend money we don't have. You like what I provide, not who I am. She sat back down, deflated. That's not true. Then tell me something about my personality that you actually enjoy. Something about who I am when I'm not being useful to you. I waited. She stared at the table. You see, I said gently, you don't actually like me. You like the idea of being married, and I'm convenient for that. I love you. You love the security I provide. There's a difference. She started crying then, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration, the kind she cried when she couldn't control a situation. This isn't how marriages are supposed to end, she said between sobs. No, they're supposed to end when one person realizes they deserve better than being tolerated. I don't just tolerate you. What do you do then? She wiped her nose. I try to help you be better. And there it is. You think I need to be better. You think I'm a project, not a person. She looked up at me with red eyes. Everyone needs improvement. Maybe. But the person you married should be someone you already like, not someone you're hoping to eventually like if they change enough. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, people were going about their normal Tuesday morning routines. Work, coffee, traffic. Simple problems with simple solutions. I called my mom, she said quietly. What did she say? She said you're probably going through a midlife crisis. I turned back to her. I'm 31. She said men sometimes panic when they feel trapped. I'm not panicked. I'm not trapped. I'm done. The difference being? Panic is emotional. This is logical. She crumpled up her notepad. So that's it. 3 years down the drain because you've decided I'm not perfect enough. 3 years down the drain because you decided I wasn't perfect enough and I finally agreed with you. What's that supposed to mean? It means you were right. We're not compatible. You need someone who enjoys being constantly evaluated and improved. I need someone who likes me as I am. She sat there for a long moment, then gathered up the divorce papers. Fine. she said, standing up. If this is what you really want, I won't fight it. But don't expect me to make this easy. I don't expect anything from you anymore. That's the point. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. I'll be staying at Rachel's while I figure out my next steps. That sounds like a good plan. She paused at the door. You know you're making a mistake, right? You're throwing away someone who actually cared about making us better. No, I said. I'm walking away from someone who cared about making me different. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I stood in the sudden silence of my house again, not our space, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the temporary quiet that came from avoiding conflict, but actual peace. The kind that comes from making a hard decision and knowing it was the right one. My phone buzzed. A text from my college buddy. How'd it go? I typed back. It's over. She's gone. How do you feel? I looked around at my living room, where I could finally put my feet up on the coffee table without judgment. At my kitchen, where I could eat whatever I wanted without commentary. At my life, which was mine again. Free, I typed. I feel free. 3 months later, the divorce was final. She kept the car, I kept the house. She took half the savings, I took all the peace of mind. She's engaged to Derek now, apparently. I heard through mutual friends that she's helping him reach his potential. Good luck to him. As for me, I learned something valuable from that girl's trip she took. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to step away from it long enough to realize it's not your problem to solve. She was right about one thing. I did think about my mistakes while she was gone, and then I fixed them.